The gunshot echoed through the frozen canyon before Rose Garrison even realized what was happening, and the man closest to her dropped face first into the snow with a red bloom spreading across his back. Rose had been traveling with a supply wagon from Sacramento to the coastal settlement of Watsonville, California, in February of 1878, when the winter storm descended without warning. The mountains between the valley and the coast could turn treacherous this time of year, and she had foolishly ignored the warnings of the station master, who told her to wait for better weather. She needed to reach her sister's homestead before the baby came, and Margaret's letters had been increasingly desperate. So Rose bundled herself in wool and fur, paid a freight driver named Henderson to take her through the pass, and prayed the storm would hold off long enough. It had not. Henderson lay dead somewhere back along the trail, killed when their wagon overturned in a snowdrift and he struck his head on a boulder. Rose had tried to save him, had wrapped his bleeding skull in strips torn from her petticoat, but the cold took him within an hour. She dragged what supplies she could carry from the wreckage and stumbled forward through the blinding white, knowing that stopping meant death. That was when the men found her, 6 of them, rough-looking prospectors or bandits. She could not tell which through the driving snow. They surrounded her in a clearing where the wind had carved the snowdrift into strange, towering shapes. Their leader, a man with a scarred face and cruel eyes, grinned at her in a way that made her stomach turn to ice colder than the storm around them. "Well now, what do we have here?" he said, reaching for her. Then came the gunshot. The scarred man fell, and Rose saw the cowboy for the first time. He came through the snowdrift like an avenging angel on a massive bay horse, his long coat billowing behind him, a rifle in one hand and a revolver in the other. He fired twice more in rapid succession, and 2 more men dropped before any of them could draw their weapons. The 4th shot caught another bandit in the shoulder as he turned to run, spinning him around and sending him tumbling into the snow. The remaining 2 men scrambled for cover behind the drift, shouting curses and finally pulling their guns. But the cowboy was already moving, sliding from his saddle with fluid grace and rolling behind a fallen log. Rose stood frozen, watching this stranger risk his life for her without hesitation. "Get down," he shouted at her, his voice rough but clear. Rose threw herself into the snow behind a rocky outcropping. Her heart hammered against her ribs as gunfire cracked through the storm. She pressed herself flat, tasting fear and snow, hearing the sharp reports of pistols and the deeper boom of the rifle. The fight lasted perhaps 3 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When silence finally fell, broken only by the howling wind, Rose dared to lift her head. The cowboy was standing, smoke still curling from his revolver. The 2 remaining bandits lay motionless in the snow. He surveyed the scene with hard eyes, then seemed to remember Rose. His expression softened as he turned toward her. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, approaching with his gun lowered but not holstered. Rose struggled to her feet, her legs trembling. "No, no, I am unharmed. You saved my life." He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26 to her 22 years. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. Dark hair fell to his collar beneath a battered hat, and his eyes were a startling gray-blue, like winter sky glimpsed through clouds. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his face. "Name's Reed Dalton," he said, finally holstering his weapon. "I was tracking these men from Monterey. They robbed a bank and killed 2 people. Rose Garrison," she managed, though her voice shook. "My wagon overturned. The driver died. I have been walking for hours." Reed's expression grew grim. He looked up at the darkening sky where the storm showed no signs of abating. "We need shelter. There's a line shack about 2 miles north if I have my bearings right. Can you ride? Rose nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The terror of the past few hours was catching up to her, making her lightheaded. Reed must have seen it in her face because he moved quickly, taking her arm to steady her. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler. "You've had a hell of a day. Let's get you warm." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, solid and reassuring, and Rose found herself leaning back against his chest, despite barely knowing this man. He was warm and he was alive, and he had saved her from a fate she did not want to imagine. They rode through the storm in silence, Reed guiding his horse with expert care through the treacherous terrain. Rose could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, the rise and fall of his breathing. She should have been frightened of him, this stranger who had killed 6 men without apparent hesitation, but instead she felt safer than she had in days. The line shack appeared through the snow like a miracle, a small, rough cabin built for shepherds or cattlemen riding the high country. Reed dismounted and helped Rose down, then kicked open the door. The interior was sparse but dry, with a stone fireplace, a rough bunk, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Someone had been maintaining it. "Get those wet things off," Reed said, already moving to build a fire. "There should be blankets in the chest." Rose's fingers were too numb to work the buttons of her coat. She fumbled uselessly until Reed came to help her, his movements efficient and impersonal. He peeled away the frozen layers of wool and helped her into a dry blanket from the chest, then turned away to give her privacy while she removed her sodden dress and undergarments. She wrapped herself in 2 more blankets and huddled near the fireplace as Reed coaxed flames to life. The warmth was exquisite agony on her frozen skin. Rose bit back a cry as feeling returned to her fingers and toes. Reed retrieved something from his saddlebags and pressed a tin cup of whiskey into her hands. "Drink," he ordered. "It will help." Rose obeyed, choking on the burn of the liquor. Reed took the cup back and drank himself, then set about tending to his horse, bringing the animal into the shelter of the cabin's lean-to, and rubbing him down with handfuls of dry grass from a store in the corner. When he returned, Rose had regained some composure. She watched him move around the small space, noting the economy of his movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats even in this relative safety. He was a man accustomed to danger. "You are a lawman?" she asked. Reed glanced at her, then shook his head. "Bounty hunter." "Those men back there had a price on their heads, $500 split 6 ways." "I see." Rose did not know what else to say. Bounty hunters had rough reputations, but this man had saved her life without hesitation, had treated her with respect and care. "Thank you for what you did." "Could not leave a woman to that," Reed said simply. He was heating beans in a pot over the fire, and the smell made Rose's stomach clench with hunger. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." He dished beans onto 2 tin plates and handed her one with a spoon. They ate in silence, the storm raging outside while the fire crackled between them. Rose studied Reed's profile in the flickering light, the strong lines of his face, the alertness in his posture even as he ate. He was handsome, she realized, in a hard-edged way that spoke of a difficult life. "Where were you headed?" Reed asked finally. "Watsonville. My sister Margaret has a homestead there with her husband. She is expecting a child soon and asked me to come help her." Rose's throat tightened. "I fear I will not make it in time now." "Storm should blow itself out by morning," Reed said. "I will take you the rest of the way. It is only about 30 miles from here if we are where I think we are." Relief washed through Rose. "I cannot thank you enough. I have some money I can pay you for your trouble. Keep your money." Reed's tone was firm. I am going that direction anyway to collect my bounty. The sheriff in Watsonville can verify the bodies and send word to Monterey." The practical nature of his words reminded Rose that this man made his living hunting other men. She should have been disturbed by that, but she had grown up on the frontier. She knew the world was a brutal place, and sometimes brutal men were needed to keep others safe. "How long have you been a bounty hunter?" she asked. Reed was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. 4 years. "Since I was 22. Before that I worked cattle, broke horses, did whatever paid. My father had a ranch up near Redding, but he lost it to drought and debt. He shot himself rather than face the shame. My mother died of grief 6 months later." His voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. "I needed money to bury them proper and pay off what was owed. Man in town told me about bounty hunting. Turned out I was good at it." The bleakness in his words cut through Rose's heart. "I am so sorry. That must have been unbearably hard." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Rose saw past the hard exterior to the pain beneath. "Life is hard. You do what you must to survive." "Yes," Rose agreed softly. "My parents died of cholera when I was 17. Margaret raised me, though she was barely 20 herself. When she married Thomas and moved to California, I stayed behind in Illinois to work as a seamstress. But when her letters came asking for help, I could not refuse. She is all the family I have." They talked into the night, the storm providing a strange intimacy as it isolated them from the world. Reed told her about tracking outlaws through deserts and mountains, about the loneliness of his work, about the small room he kept above a saloon in Monterey that barely qualified as home. Rose told him about her work sewing dresses for wealthy women in Chicago, about missing her sister, about her dreams of perhaps opening her own dress shop someday if she could save enough money. The conversation flowed easily despite their different worlds. Rose found herself laughing at Reed's dry observations about human nature, and she saw him smile in return, the expression transforming his face into something almost boyish. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Reed insisted she take the bunk while he rolled up in a blanket near the fire. "I have slept in worse places," he assured her when she protested. "Get some rest. We leave at first light." Rose lay in the narrow bunk, listening to the wind howl and the fire pop. She could hear Reed's steady breathing across the room and found it comforting. She had never expected to feel safe with a bounty hunter who had killed 6 men before her eyes. But Reed Dalton was proving to be far more complex than his profession suggested. As she drifted toward sleep, Rose realized she wanted to know more about this mysterious man who had ridden out of a snowstorm to save her life. The morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed into a pristine landscape of white broken only by dark pines and exposed rock. Reed had already been up for an hour when Rose woke, packing supplies and saddling his horse. He had retrieved her traveling bag from where she had dropped it during the attack and set it near the door. "How are you feeling?" he asked as she emerged bundled in her mostly dry clothes. "Much better. Strong enough to ride." They shared a quick breakfast of hardtack and coffee, then set out across the snow-covered terrain. Rose rode in front of Reed again, his arm secure around her waist. The ride was grueling, the horse struggling through deep drifts, but Reed proved an expert guide. He found game trails and sheltered routes that made the journey possible. They talked as they rode, continuing the conversation from the night before. Rose found herself telling Reed things she had never shared with anyone, about her fear of ending up alone, about the pressure she felt to marry well when she had no interest in the men who courted her back in Illinois. Reed listened without judgment, occasionally offering observations that showed surprising insight. "You should not marry unless you want to," he said firmly. "Life is hard enough without binding yourself to someone who makes it harder," says the man who rides alone, Rose teased gently. "I ride alone because this life is no life for a family," Reed replied. "Too dangerous, too uncertain. But if I had something better to offer, someone to offer it to, I would not hesitate." There was something in his voice that made Rose's heart skip. She found herself wondering what it would be like to be the woman Reed Dalton chose to share his life with, then immediately scolded herself for such foolish thoughts. They had known each other barely a day, and once they reached Watsonville, they would part ways. He would collect his bounty and move on to the next hunt, and she would help her sister with the baby and try to build some kind of life on the coast. But the thought left her feeling hollow. They stopped once to rest the horse and eat a cold meal. Reed stood watch while Rose walked around to restore circulation to her legs. The silence between them had grown comfortable, requiring no constant conversation. Rose found herself studying Reed when he was not looking, noting the grace in his movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the gentleness with which he handled his horse. "Why did you really help me?" she asked suddenly. "You said you were tracking those men, but you could have waited until they moved on. You put yourself in danger by attacking 6 armed men." Reed was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "5 years ago, my younger sister Ellen was traveling to Sacramento with a family friend. Their wagon was attacked by road agents. The friend was killed. Ellen was not found until 3 days later. She lived, but she was never the same. She killed herself a year later." He paused, his jaw tight. "When I saw those men surrounding you, I saw Ellen. I could not walk away. Would not." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. Reed stared down at their joined hands, then slowly curled his fingers around hers. "I am so sorry," Rose whispered. "Your family suffered so much. We all suffer," Reed said. "But sometimes we get a chance to make it mean something, to save someone else's family, even if we could not save our own." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, connected by shared grief and understanding. Then Reed gently released her hand and turned back to the horse. "We should keep moving. Want to make Watsonville before dark." The terrain grew easier as they descended from the high country toward the coastal plain. By afternoon they could see Watsonville in the distance, a growing settlement nestled in a fertile valley. Farms and orchards spread out around the town, their fields dormant under winter's grip, but promising abundance come spring. Rose felt a twist of conflicting emotions. Relief that she would soon see Margaret and be able to help her sister, but also regret that her time with Reed was ending. She had never connected with anyone so quickly or so deeply. It felt like discovering something precious only to have it immediately snatched away. Reed guided them to the sheriff's office first. The lawman, a portly middle-aged man named Bennett, listened to Reed's account and examined the descriptions on the wanted posters. He agreed to send men to retrieve the bodies and verify their identities, then write a voucher for Reed's payment. "You did good work, Dalton," Bennett said, shaking Reed's hand. "Those boys were bad business. The bank in Monterey will be mighty pleased." Reed just nodded, accepting the thanks without comment. Then he turned to Rose. "Let me take you to your sister now." The Garrison homestead was 2 miles outside town, a modest but well-maintained property with a white farmhouse, a barn, and several outbuildings. Chickens scratched in the yard despite the cold, and smoke rose from the chimney. Before Rose could dismount, the front door flew open and Margaret appeared, her pregnant belly prominent beneath her apron. "Rose! Oh, thank God!" Margaret hurried down the steps as fast as her condition allowed. Rose slid from the horse and ran to meet her, and the sisters embraced fiercely. "I was so worried when you did not arrive yesterday," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "The storm was so fierce, and I kept imagining terrible things." "You are not wrong to worry," Rose said, pulling back to look at her sister. Margaret was 3 years older, with the same dark hair but softer features and brown eyes. "I encountered trouble on the road. If not for Mr. Dalton, I would not be standing here." For the first time, Margaret seemed to notice Reed sitting quietly on his horse. Her eyes widened as she took in his guns, his weathered appearance, the easy competence in his posture. "Mr. Dalton, please come inside," she said immediately. "Any man who helped my sister is welcome at our table. Thomas," she called toward the barn, "Thomas, come meet our guests." Thomas Garrison emerged from the barn, a tall man with sandy hair and a farmer's solid build. He was perhaps 30 years old, with an honest face and calloused hands. After quick introductions and a brief explanation of what had occurred, Thomas insisted Reed stable his horse in their barn while Margaret ushered Rose inside. The farmhouse was warm and cozy, furnished simply but comfortably. Margaret sat Rose down and pressed hot tea into her hands while demanding the full story. Rose told her everything, watching her sister's face pale at the description of the attack and glow with gratitude when she described Reed's heroic intervention. "He saved your life," Margaret said, gripping Rose's hand. "We owe him everything." "He said he was just doing his job," Rose replied, but her voice was soft. "But I think it was more than that." Margaret's keen eyes studied her sister's face. "You care for him." It was not a question. Rose felt herself flush. "I barely know him. We only met yesterday." "Sometimes a day is enough," Margaret said gently. "I knew I loved Thomas within an hour of meeting him. The heart knows what it wants, Rose, and it does not always wait for logic to catch up." Before Rose could respond, the men entered the house, Thomas gesturing expansively while Reed followed more quietly. Thomas was already insisting Reed stay for supper at minimum, and Margaret quickly added that he should stay the night as well. "We have a small guest room," she said. "It is not much, but it is warm and clean. You have done so much for my sister. Please let us offer you hospitality in return." Reed looked uncomfortable with the attention, but he agreed after Thomas would not take no for an answer. The evening that followed was surprisingly pleasant. Margaret proved an excellent cook despite her condition, and over a meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and dried apple pie, the conversation flowed easily. Thomas was interested in Reed's travels, asking questions about different parts of California. Reed answered readily, displaying a breadth of knowledge that came from years of traversing the state. He avoided discussing the violence of his work, instead describing landscapes and towns, people he had met, the changes sweeping through the territory as it grew and modernized. Rose found herself watching him throughout the meal, noting how he relaxed slightly in the warmth and safety of the farm, how his rare smiles became slightly more frequent. She caught him watching her as well, their eyes meeting across the table in a way that made her breath catch. After supper, Margaret insisted Rose was exhausted and needed rest, shooing her toward the small bedroom they had prepared. But Rose found sleep elusive. She lay awake, listening to the murmur of male voices from the front room where Reed and Thomas were sharing a bottle of whiskey, thinking about the man who had ridden into her life like something out of a dime novel. She must have eventually dozed because she woke to pale morning light and the smell of coffee. When she emerged, she found Margaret alone in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "The men are in the barn," Margaret said, reading the question in Rose's eyes. "Thomas is showing Reed his horses. He has been talking about getting a new stallion for breeding, and apparently Reed knows horses." He does seem to know a great deal about many things, Rose said, accepting a cup of coffee. Margaret turned from the stove, her expression serious. He is leaving today, is he not? Going back to Monterey to collect his bounty. Rose nodded, the knowledge sitting heavy in her chest. Are you going to let him ride away? Margaret asked gently. What choice do I have? I came here to help you. He has his own life, his own work. You could ask him to stay, Margaret suggested. Or tell him how you feel. Or at least make sure he knows where to find you if he wants to. Rose shook her head. He is a bounty hunter, Margaret. He rides from town to town hunting dangerous men. That is no life for a husband, and I cannot imagine he wants a wife. Did you ask him? Margaret challenged. Rose, I see the way he looks at you. That man has feelings for you. Anyone with eyes can see it. But he is a gentleman, or gentleman enough. He will not speak unless you give him reason to believe his words would be welcome. Before Rose could reply, the front door opened and Thomas entered with Reed. The bounty hunter had clearly cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked younger like this, more approachable, though his eyes retained their watchful quality. They ate breakfast together, the conversation more subdued than the night before. Everyone seemed aware that parting was imminent. After the meal, Reed helped Thomas with some repairs on the barn door, refusing to leave without offering something in return for their hospitality. Rose watched from the kitchen window as the two men worked together, seeing how naturally Reed moved, how Thomas clearly enjoyed his company. When the repairs were finished, Reed came inside to collect his few belongings. Margaret hugged him fiercely, making him promise to take care of himself. Thomas shook his hand and told him he was welcome at their home any time. Then it was just Rose and Reed standing in the front yard while Thomas and Margaret discreetly retreated inside. I suppose this is goodbye, Rose said, hating how small her voice sounded. Reed's jaw worked as if he was struggling with words. I suppose it is. You will be safe here with your sister. This is a good place and they are good people. What about you? Where will you go after Monterey? He shrugged. Wherever the next job takes me. That is the life I have. Is it the life you want? Rose asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Reed looked at her for a long moment, something intense and aching in his eyes. What I want does not matter much. I am what I am, Rose, a man who makes his living with guns and violence. You deserve better than that. You deserve a home, safety, a man who can give you the life you should have. Should I not get to decide what I deserve? Rose stepped closer, her heart pounding. Reed, I have known you less than 2 days, but I have felt more alive, more understood, more myself with you than I have in my entire life. I do not know what that means or where it could go, but I know I do not want to watch you ride away and wonder what might have been if I had been brave enough to speak. Reed's expression cracked, revealing the longing beneath. Rose, I have nothing to offer you. No home, no stability, no future beyond the next bounty. You would be tying yourself to a life of uncertainty and danger. You have yourself, Rose said fiercely. You are a good man, Reed Dalton. I see it in everything you do. You saved me not for reward, but because it was right. You treat people with respect regardless of their station. You are intelligent, thoughtful, and kind beneath that hard exterior you show the world. That is what I would be tying myself to, and that does not frighten me. Reed reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hands. You are remarkable, he said roughly. Brave and beautiful and too good for this world. I have been half in love with you since I saw you standing in that snowdrift, refusing to cower before those men even though you were terrified. Only half, Rose managed, even as tears blurred her vision. He laughed, the sound raw and genuine. Completely, wholly, terrifyingly in love with you, and I have no idea what to do about it. You could stay, Rose whispered. Give up bounty hunting. Thomas says they need workers in town, in the orchards and on the farms. It is not exciting work, but it is honest and safe. We could build something here, together. Reed closed his eyes, clearly warring with himself. I have been alone for so long. I do not know if I remember how to be part of something, part of someone's life. Then learn, Rose said, standing on her toes to press her forehead against his. We can learn together. Please, Reed, do not ride away, not when we have found each other against all odds. For a moment, Reed stood frozen. Then he kissed her, a desperate, hungry kiss that tasted of coffee and longing and hope. Rose wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Yes, Reed said hoarsely. God help me, yes, I will stay. I will try to be the man you see in me. Joy burst through Rose like sunrise. She kissed him again, laughing against his mouth. Behind them, from the house, she heard Margaret whoop with delight, apparently having watched the whole exchange through the window. Thomas's deeper laugh followed. The next weeks unfolded like a dream. Reed took a room at the boarding house in town and immediately began looking for work. His reputation as the man who had taken down the gang that killed 2 people in Monterey actually worked in his favor. The bank manager, impressed by his courage and skill, offered him a job as a guard. The position paid well and kept Reed in town, providing exactly the stability he needed. Rose helped Margaret through the final weeks of her pregnancy while courting Reed properly. He came to the farm every evening for supper, and they took long walks through the orchards, talking about everything and nothing. Reed proved surprisingly romantic beneath his rough exterior, bringing Rose wildflowers he picked on the way from town, reading to her from books he borrowed from the lending library, listening with genuine interest when she described her dreams for the future. Margaret's baby arrived in late March, a healthy boy they named Samuel. Rose assisted the midwife through the long delivery, and when it was over and Margaret cradled her son, tears of joy streaming down her face, Rose looked up to find Reed watching from the doorway where Thomas had let him in. The expression on his face as he looked at the new family, then at Rose, spoke of yearning and possibility. A week after Samuel's birth, Reed asked Rose to marry him. He did it simply, without grand gestures, taking her hand as they sat on the porch steps watching the sunset. I have been alone most of my life, he said quietly. Survived by keeping people at a distance, never letting anyone matter too much. But you have broken through every wall I built, Rose. You make me want to be better, do better. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me? Rose said yes through happy tears, and Reed slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. He had bought it with his first month's wages, he told her, wanting to have something to offer her that represented his new life, his commitment to staying. They married in May in the small church in Watsonville, with Margaret and Thomas as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Rose wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Reed wore a new suit, looking handsome but uncomfortable in the formal clothes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reed kissed her with such tender passion that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a 2-room cottage with a garden plot and room to expand. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Rose had never been happier. Reed continued his work at the bank, earning respect for his diligence and calm handling of a robbery attempt that summer. Rose took in sewing work, her reputation for quality craftsmanship spreading quickly through the community. But more important than any of that was the life they built together. Rose taught Reed how to be part of a family again, how to let himself be loved and cared for. Reed taught Rose that she was stronger than she knew, that her courage and kindness were forces that could change lives. They learned each other's rhythms, their quirks and preferences, the way all new couples do. They fought occasionally, usually about Reed's tendency to be overprotective or Rose's stubborn independence, but they always reconciled, never letting the sun set on their anger. Their physical relationship unfolded with surprising passion. Reed was a gentle, attentive lover, treating Rose like something precious. But there was fire between them too, a hunger born of genuine love and desire. Rose discovered pleasures she had never imagined, and Reed, who had known only brief impersonal encounters before, found that intimacy meant so much more when it was rooted in love. The first winter of their marriage brought cold rains and occasional snow, reminding them both of the storm that had brought them together. On the anniversary of that fateful day, they rode out to the line shack where they had sheltered. It was still there, weathered but intact. They went inside and found it exactly as they had left it. Reed built a fire while Rose spread a blanket, and they made love there as the rain drummed on the roof, celebrating the chance encounter that had changed both their lives forever. Rose discovered she was pregnant in the spring, just over a year after their wedding. Reed was initially terrified, his fear of loss rising up to haunt him. But Rose was patient, helping him work through his anxiety, and gradually his fear transformed into excited anticipation. He built a cradle with his own hands, working late into the night to get every detail perfect. Their son was born in December of 1879, a squalling, healthy baby with Reed's gray-blue eyes and Rose's dark hair. They named him Samuel Reed Dalton, honoring both the nephew who had arrived shortly before their relationship began and the father who had given him life. Reed cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by love and terror and gratitude. Fatherhood changed Reed in ways Rose had not anticipated. He became even more grounded, more committed to building a good life for his family. When the bank offered him a promotion to assistant manager, he accepted, using the increased income to expand their cottage into a proper house with 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen. Rose thrived as a mother, finding joy in the small daily tasks of caring for Samuel. She continued her sewing work, setting up a proper workroom in their expanded house, and taking commissions for increasingly elaborate pieces. Her skill and artistic eye earned her a reputation that brought customers from as far away as Monterey and San Jose. They spent countless hours at Margaret and Thomas's farm, the cousins growing up together as Samuel and little Samuel became best friends despite the age difference. The two families were knit together by love and shared history, supporting each other through good times and hard. A daughter arrived 3 years after Samuel, a beautiful girl they named Ellen Margaret Dalton. Reed had overcome his ghosts enough to honor his lost sister with their daughter's name, and he doted on little Ellen with fierce devotion. Rose watched her husband transform from the lonely, dangerous man she had met in the Snowdrift into a devoted father who came home every evening eager to play with his children, who sang lullabies in his rough voice, and told elaborate bedtime stories. The years passed in the steady rhythm of a good life. Reed eventually became the bank manager, a position of significant respect in the growing community. Rose opened a small dress shop in town when the children were older, fulfilling her long-held dream. They prospered modestly, never wealthy but always comfortable, with enough to give their children opportunities and help others when needed. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Ellen was more adventurous, reminding Reed of Rose in her boldness and warm heart. A third child, A son they named Thomas after Rose's brother-in-law, arrived when Rose was 30, completing their family. Through it all, Rose and Reed's love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of their early days mellowed into something richer and more complex, a partnership built on trust and respect and unwavering commitment. They knew each other's every mood and thought, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, finished each other's sentences without thinking about it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Reed took Rose back to the spot where he had first seen her, surrounded by men in that snowdrift. The weather was clear and warm, spring flowers blooming across the meadow where she had nearly died. "I think about this place sometimes," Reed said, holding her hand as they stood where the confrontation had occurred. "How easily I might have arrived 10 minutes later, or chosen a different path, or decided the storm was too dangerous to keep tracking. Every choice that brought me to this exact spot at the exact moment you needed me seems impossible, but here we are." "Fate," Rose said softly, "or providence, or blind luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every day." "I had given up on happiness," Reed confessed. "Had accepted that I would live alone and die alone, and I told myself that was enough. Then I saw you, standing defiant in the snow, and something in me woke up. You gave me back my life, Rose. My real life, not just existence." Rose turned into his arms, kissing him with all the love in her heart. "You saved me first," she reminded him. "In every way that matters." They returned home to find their children being watched by Margaret, who shooed the couple toward their bedroom with a knowing smile. Rose and Reed made love that afternoon with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite dimmed, celebrating a decade of love and life together. More years passed. Samuel left for university in San Francisco, determined to become a lawyer. Ellen, as independent as her mother, announced her intention to become a teacher and attended the normal school in San Jose. Thomas, the baby, showed his father's skill with horses and began working at a breeding ranch outside Watsonville. Rose and Reed entered middle age gracefully, their hair graying, their bodies softening, but their love as strong as ever. They became the couple younger people looked to as an example, the proof that true partnership was possible. They hosted Sunday dinners where their children and eventually grandchildren gathered, filling their home with laughter and chaos and love. Margaret and Thomas remained their closest friends, the bond between the two families unbreakable. When Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack at 58, Reed helped Margaret manage the farm until she decided to sell it and move to a small house in town near Rose and Reed. The sisters, reunited in proximity after so many years, spent their afternoons together sewing and reminiscing and watching their grandchildren play. Reed retired from the bank at 62, handing over management to a younger man he had trained. He spent his remaining years working in the garden Rose had always wanted, building furniture for their children's homes, and volunteering at the church. The man who had once made his living with violence became known as the gentlest soul in Watsonville, someone who could be counted on to help anyone in need. On the 50th anniversary of the day they met, Rose and Reed traveled once more to the line shack. They were both 70 now, moving more slowly but still strong. The shack had fallen into disrepair, the roof partially collapsed, but they could still see the outline of their sanctuary. "I keep thinking I should tell you something profound," Rose said, leaning against Reed as they sat on a fallen log. "Some grand summary of our 50 years together, but all I can think is that I would do it all again, exactly the same way." "Every joy and every sorrow," Reed agreed. "Every triumph and every struggle, all of it, as long as you were beside me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains that had nearly claimed Rose's life and instead given her everything she had ever wanted. Reed passed away peacefully in his sleep at 74, his heart simply stopping one winter night with Rose curled beside him. She woke to find him gone, still warm, a slight smile on his weathered face. The grief was crushing, but Rose took comfort in knowing he had been happy, had lived a good life, had been loved and had loved in return. She lived another 6 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, still sewing almost until the end, her mind sharp and her spirit strong. On a clear spring morning, Rose asked her daughter Ellen to take her to the meadow where it had all begun. Ellen, understanding without explanation, helped her elderly mother into the wagon and drove her up into the mountains. At the meadow, Rose asked to be left alone for a little while. Ellen helped her to a comfortable spot and retreated to wait by the wagon. Rose sat in the grass and wildflowers, remembering a desperate girl in a snowdrift and the cowboy who had ridden through hell to save her. She remembered every moment of the life they had built, every joy and sorrow they had shared, every touch and word and look that had woven their souls together. "I am coming, my love," she whispered to the wind. "Wait for me just a little longer." When Ellen returned after an hour, she found her mother sitting peacefully in the sun, her eyes closed, the same slight smile on her face that Reed had worn in death. Rose Dalton had slipped away as gently as a sigh, joining the man she had loved for over 5 decades. They buried Rose beside Reed in the Watsonville Cemetery, under a spreading oak tree. Their children erected a simple headstone that read, "Rose and Reed Dalton, 2 souls who found each other in a snowstorm and spent a lifetime grateful." Below that, they added the dates and a final line, "Love endures beyond death." The story of the cowboy who rode through a snowdrift and saved a woman from desperados became legend in Watsonville, passed down through generations as a testament to courage and love. Their descendants, scattered now across California and beyond, still gathered occasionally at the old cemetery to honor the couple who had built a legacy of devotion and kindness that continued to shape their lives. In the end, Rose and Reed Dalton had proven that even the hardest lives could be transformed by love, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes fate intervened in the most dramatic ways to bring 2 people together who were meant to walk through life as one. Their love story, born in violence and desperation, had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting, a reminder that even in the rough and brutal world of the Old West, true love could not only survive but thrive, creating ripples of goodness that extended far beyond a single lifetime.